everyone. I'm Sienna from Dragon Trail Interactive, and I'll be leading today's panel on youth travel. This is really a key market segment, and especially in the post-COVID recovery era. So we're delighted to have a group of experts join us today to discuss how to get young people traveling again and what resources Beijing has for youth travel. Joining us in Beijing, we have David Doe and Joey Knotts. David Doe is the co-founder of letslocals.com, an experience-focused travel company that provides sightseeing tours of Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, and Zhejiang, including food experiences, walking and cycling tours, museum tours, classes in arts and other cultural activities. He is a senior English-speaking tour guide and a gold medal tour guide accredited by the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. He is also a member of the writing team of 2 publications for foreign language tour guides in China. Joey Knotts has been based in Beijing for the past 6 years, and he's managing editor of local lifestyle and entertainment magazine, The Beijinger. The magazine and website keeps Beijing's English-speaking community informed about life in the city, and it's also a guiding light for tourists and newcomers. Joey has a degree in political science and a master's degree in contemporary Chinese development. In Amsterdam, we have David Chapman, Director General of WYSE Travel Confederation, a global not-for-profit organization that advocates the social, cultural, and economic value of youth, student, and educational travel on behalf of 600 member companies from around the world. Under David's direction, WYSE Travel Confederation coordinates the research and representation activities of 4 industry panels and organizes a variety of international trade events serving specialists in youth and student travel, including the World Youth and Student Travel Conference, WYSTIC. Joining us from Frankfurt is Jürgen Kremer, Director of Shanghai China International Travel Service Limited. Specializing in tourism to China, Jürgen studied sinology in Frankfurt and Guangzhou, and subsequently worked as a tour leader for German groups in China for 10 years before moving on to management positions for a large international tour operator in Beijing and a Chinese tour operator in Shanghai. After returning to Germany, he managed the Frankfurt office of China Tours, and he currently manages the newly opened office of Shanghai CITS in Frankfurt. So welcome, everyone. We're very pleased to have all of you with us today and look forward to hearing your insights. I'd like to start the panel with a question first for David Chapman and then for Jürgen. So the question is, young people are already being heralded as the saviors of tourism in the post-COVID era. What extent do you think this is or will turn out to be true?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for allowing us to take part of the session. As Sienna's just said, WYSE Travel Confederation, WYSE stands for the World Youth, Student and Educational Travel Confederation, is the representative body for youth and student travel operators. And one of the things which we do is to undertake a very large piece of consumer research every 5 years, which is known as New Horizons. And this has become one of the largest pieces of research specifically in this youth and student marketplace. And the last time we ran this report was in 2017, and we had around 57,000 respondents from consumers. So it gives a very good, strong, undeniable base for the travel motivations of students. And I think one of the interesting things to address your question is that young people have always been a lot more resilient to pandemics, epidemics, political unrest, and those types of things within a destination. And they've often returned back to the destination or started to travel into a destination where there has been some sort of strife much, much quicker and much earlier than the standard tourism or standard tourists. I think the COVID situation does put a completely different context onto this. There's a lot of concern about travel safety. I think there's a lot of concern about getting trapped or stranded in a destination in terms of quarantine operations. But I think once we've got through all of those types of things, then young people will will start to travel a little bit earlier than the traditional tourists, and will really start to push into destinations that are interesting. And I think that leads on to further discussion later on about the interesting nature of the travel.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it does seem like youth travel will be very important and a good place for people to focus their energies on now, thinking about the first visitors that they might get. Jürgen, what is your kind of experience with youth travel and your expectations for how young people will start traveling again?
I would agree with David that young people will most probably start traveling earlier, because what I can experience in Europe now is that mostly young people are already traveling to European destinations now from Germany or from the German-speaking source markets. But that is one thing. The other thing is that young people will probably still spend less. That is my experience in the last 20 years, that trips for young people or trips from young people are usually less expensive. They are spending less money on the tour. So this is the disadvantage or the problem with the young people's travel. And I think that will continue in the future as well. The other thing is, of course, also that mostly currently with the economic crisis that is accompanying the pandemic, young people are more affected than middle-aged or older people like myself, because they are relatively new in the job. There have been people delayed, fired in the German-speaking source markets, and mostly young people have been affected because due to labor laws, people who are working in a company longer, they are released later. So this is another problem. But of course, in the midterm, the young people are very important, because when they are working, when they are a couple, two couples without kids, they will travel and they spend just like normal middle-aged travelers as well. But in general, I have to say that especially for China, the percentage of young people that are traveling with us is not that high. It's mostly middle-aged people, depending on the kind of trip we are doing. The classical tours to China, there the average age is 45 to 50 and up. But we are also doing some more active tours, hiking tours. The average age there is 35 to 40, but not really young. We have some young people, but not that many.
I see. So it's important to think about what advantages China and Beijing might have for youth travel and make sure that these are communicated very clearly as we go forward. And that brings me to the next question, which I'd like to ask first of David Doe in Beijing. What do you think makes China and especially Beijing a strong destination for youth travel?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. This year, I went to Estonia and Finland to do the Beijing inbound tour promotion on behalf of the Beijing Municipal Culture and Tourism Bureau Overseas Center. To my surprise, for these two cities, roughly more than 50% of the people who were coming to our promotion venue were young people, which is really good to know. And when I just talk to these people, I ask them, I say, hey, what makes you come to our venue? And what makes you think that Beijing is special? Almost everybody just said, we love the Chinese culture. I would like to say Beijing is a very, very, very unique destination. And this is the capital of China. And for the recent 600 years, Beijing aggregate lots of various cultures and histories. We have Great Wall, have Forbidden City, Temple of Heaven, all type of these things. And to most of the Westerners, this is something way different from the culture they are used to. So From this perspective, it is a unique culture and history itself that attracted a lot of young people. And also another thing from my company's statistics, last year we have roughly like 19,000 people. They booked the tours on our website, www.letslocals.com. 65% of the people, their age are under 35. So I assume this group of people, they are the young people. And the reason why they choose our program is because I think one of the key reasons is our program is different from the traditional inbound travel agents. Because different from like a 3-day or 4-day tours here in Beijing, we just break all activities into 2 hours, 3 hours, which exactly just meet the needs from the young people. I think for young people, they want something like it's just like they don't want to spend like 3 days staying at one place, with one guide. They want to have like 3 days. For instance, they break 3 days into 6 different sections, 2 sections per day. They want to meet different people. They want to see different experience. They want to talk to the different group of local people. So our segmented program, like a 2-hour-long, 3-hour-long program, just exactly meet their needs. So from my perspective, I just say it's not only the culture itself, but also the way we present Beijing in a way that just meets their needs. They don't want like a 3-day, 4-day tour. They just want like a 2-hour, 3-hour, like a short period experience. So I think when we just design our product for the next 10 or 15 years, so this will be like the main trend. Yeah, this is from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think that's very helpful information for people who are designing products, especially for the youth travel market. I'd also like to ask Joey, in your opinion, what makes Beijing a strong destination for young people to visit?
Hi, and first of all, thank you for having me. I think China and Beijing in particular are in a position right now where young people are looking at it and they're curious about what's going on there because they see that it's an area of the world that's going to shape the rest of the world. And I think it sparks a curiosity in them as people who have the rest of their lives ahead of them. But on top of that, China and Beijing in particular have a couple of key strengths in terms of the kinds of things that young people are looking for. And I think the obvious one is food, right? Nobody comes to China and leaves without saying, wow, the food was just amazing. But Beijing specifically has maybe the strongest fusion food scene in the world. And I think that's illustrated in part by when Michelin came and by seeing who they gave their awards and recommendations to, you could see there were a lot of strong fusion cuisine restaurants, as well as places like TRB, which were recognized by TripAdvisor as one of the best restaurants in the world, let alone fusion restaurants. Another area which we don't think about as much, but can still be important for a certain segment of young people is music tourism. Beijing used to have a very strong, used to and still does have a very strong sort of rock and roll indie music scene, which would attract a few young people here and there. Today we're also seeing a burgeoning hip-hop scene, especially with a number of Chinese-American rappers becoming big abroad. That's drawing attention to cities like Beijing and what's going on here, especially as we see on Chinese television, a new reality show focused around hip-hop, and another one around hip-hop dance. Just shows how quickly that industry and that part of culture in China is growing, and I think that's going to be important going forward for a certain segment of the tourist population.
Thank you, Joey. That's really interesting. I think generally when people think about travel to China and think about travel to Beijing, hip hop is probably the last thing that comes to mind. Yeah, very interesting. Jürgen, from your point of view, you said that most of the your clientele that you've worked with are on the older end of the age spectrum. So if you were thinking about kind of selling Beijing or China to a younger audience, what kinds of things might you choose to emphasize?
Well, as I mentioned before, we have some younger groups, we have some school exchanges, but one of our clients is the largest tour operator for youth travel in the German-speaking source markets all over the world. Of course, they are arranging tours. And I also discussed the topic with them because they are the real experts. But in general, I think that, of course, Beijing has one very big advantage. It is a very fast developing city, one of the fastest in the world, I would say. And there is a lot of media coverage about China and about Beijing in the German media. And young people are definitely interested in that. Then there is, it's mentioned in Germany that IT and also artificial intelligence is very developed in Beijing or in China in general, much more developed than it is in Germany. There is everything is quite slow here. So this is also an interesting topic for younger people traveling to China or making them travel to China or to Beijing. And then, of course, as mentioned before, the great mixture of classical culture like the Forbidden City or the Great Wall of China and modern culture with clubs and bars and wonderful restaurants. That is something which does not exist in a lot of cities in the world. There are some, but not that many. And for people who are interested in nature, the landscape around Beijing is also very nice. We sell the hiking tours on the Great Wall, for example, very well. The other thing is the very good flight connections from Germany, from Europe to Beijing, which used to be. We hope that it will return to that level, but there were 3, 4, 5 flights per day from Germany alone to Beijing. We hope that this will be again the same, the culinary highlights that I mentioned before, and also that it's possible, at least we try to do that, to arrange for our groups of younger people to experience the authentic life of locals in Beijing. We try to use relatively bargain hotels, I would say. We try to use smaller hotels that are hopefully located in the hutongs of Beijing, because younger people are interested in that. We try to arrange meetings with young people, with locals from Beijing. We try to teach them a little bit of Chinese, which is of course not possible in a trip of 2 weeks. Nobody will be able to speak Chinese after that, but at least some essential words they know. And we also try to arrange visits to schools for our younger people. If it's groups, at least they can participate in the German lessons of the students or the English lessons of the students. But it's particularly helpful, of course, if it's the German lesson, because that is then a thing which is good for our clients, for our travelers, but also for the Chinese students who try to learn German, which is not an easy language to learn, and they can then communicate with some Germans, at least for a while. And with the modern communication, sometimes there are contacts that are developing even after our clients, our students, our travelers have returned to Germany. And we also try to arrange some other programs, short programs like visit of a karaoke bar or a bicycle tour in the hutongs, or sometimes they want to visit a cheap market in Beijing. This is things which we normally do not arrange for our regular middle-aged groups, but for our younger groups we do that. And that is something which you usually do not have. That is a very unique feature of Beijing and of the, at least of the cities in eastern China, especially this very dynamic development of the city, which is great.
You've touched on something that I think is very important, especially for young travelers, and that is this desire to go beyond sightseeing and to really experience a destination through activities. So I wanted to ask you, David Doe, how you think Beijing as a destination can embrace this desire of travelers to have real experiences.
So to answer this question, first of all, I would like to say every traveler in the world, I think they are 99% the same. So when they go to a new destination, they want to see the best part of the sightseeing, they want to experience the local thing, and they want to chat to the local people, they want to have their photo taken at an iconic place. So when Chinese people go out to Europe, to United States, we do this. And I think when the Westerners come to China, they would expect the same thing like that. In order to meet their demand, I mean, traveling this kind of like a demand, I will say from our perspective, when the travel agent, product manager, when they do their product design, they have put all of this into consideration. So we have to say, inbound touring China has been operating for almost like 20-25 years. Unfortunately, this model has not changed much. Because when I first in this business in 1999, can you believe that? It's about 21 years ago. When I first became a tour guide, and this is 21 years after today, so our program actually did not change much. So I would say if we want to embrace the future of the new trend of traveling, we say how we are going to attract the young people. I think this is really the very, very important thing for the tour product managers to know what's the needs for the young generation to embrace this future. So today we have like 100 millions of Chinese people, they are going out everywhere in the world. When I just compare the product that, the Western companies run for the Chinese visitors as compared to what we run for the foreign visitors, I will say the Western program is here while the Chinese program is here. Why is that? Because I think our product manager, they don't have such motivation just to make a change. This is really the key part. I would like to use this opportunity to speak to all the travel agent friends in China. Make a change. You will have to know the future. So this is the first thing. And the second thing I think is if we want to show the visitors the coolest traveling experience, who is going to handle the tour? The tour guides. Am I right? So I used to be a tour guide. I just travel all over China with various groups for almost like 20 years. But today, because of this pandemic situation, the tour guide service and also the training program actually did not really keep going. And from my past 2 years, because I also did the training for tour guide, I just personally figured out that, as compared to 10 years ago, the tour guide, their knowledge, their language skill is really a kind of like a lower, even way lower than 10 years ago when I was a tour guide. So at this moment, I will say when COVID-19 is gone, when all visitors come back to China, who's going to take care of these people? So this is really the thing that I think crucially we have to do. So we need to make a change for the tour product, and we have to have a very good, stable, and professional team that can just take care of the groups. This is not only for today. It's going to for the next 10, next 15 years. So if we don't do this, I will say maybe 10 years after, when foreign visitors come to China, they just use an app, an audio guide app for that. There will be no guide. So if China or if Beijing wants to embrace, we just say, the future of tourism, the crucial two things, okay, I would like to repeat. One is just to make a change for the tour product. And second, just to pay more attention to the tour guide training courses. So this is from my perspective.
Thank you. Joey, I'd like to ask you in terms of experiences. You mentioned food and maybe going to musical events. Is there anything else that you think is important for Beijing to really embrace this idea of experience travel to suit the upcoming travel market?
Well, I think there certainly is, and I would agree with David that there is a certain segment of the population of travelers who do want to go and take a picture with these iconic sites. But I think there's also another segment that we shouldn't forget about, that wants to, almost wants to avoid that and wants to go to places still as a tourist, but almost pretend that they're not a tourist, and to that, to them, that's what experience is all about. I think from world travelers, you know, especially young people, the number one thing I've heard is, I want to go experience the real. And I think the great thing about Beijing is it does have both. You know, I think one great example is the Nanlou Guxiang and Beilou Guxiang hutongs. You have this right next to each other in these alleyways that run north to south. You have an alleyway that's completely packed with tourists, which can be fun for travelers in itself. And then just going up north, you just cross a road, and all of a sudden you're in a much less densely populated part of the city, but it still feels historic, and it still is lively and has a lot going on, and can be attractive to people who come to Beijing looking to really just see what's actually going on in the city. And I think going forward, we know there's going to be a lot of development in Beijing. The city has just released a 10-year plan. It plans a lot of construction and also plans to preserve a lot of the historical spots in Beijing. But as it goes forward with that plan, I think it's important to remember what those kinds of experiential aspects of Beijing are. A few other examples are, you know, Beijing is maybe one of the few places in the world where you can just go a little bit outside of the city and stay at a farmer's house, which is also very cost-effective, which was mentioned as a barrier earlier for young travelers. So that's something that can be very attractive as well, and something to keep an eye out as Beijing continues to develop.
Thank you. Those are great suggestions. Next, wanted to turn to you, David Chapman. I didn't know if you just raised your hand if you had something to add to that about experience travel, but I wanted to talk not just about tourism, but tourism and hospitality as a career for young people, because there is a worry that because of the effects that we've seen from COVID-19, that young people today might be less interested to go into fields of tourism and hospitality. And then that can make things like what David Doe talked about with tour guides, foreign language skills, make this even more of an issue going forward. So what do you think the tourism and hospitality industries can do, or what support do they need now to make sure that these are fields that young people will consider going into as a career?
I think the there are going to be two parts to this particular problem. The first one is now and into the future. And inevitably, at the moment, all tourism and hospitality businesses need some sort of support or relief from their local governments. Everywhere with social distancing and with quarantining, drops in footfall are under pressure in terms of being able to stay in business. And I think that we are going to see some fairly big casualties over the coming 6 to 12 months. We saw just 2 weeks ago STA Travel, one of the largest student travel agents in the world, going into liquidation. There are airlines teetering on the edge, and there are hotel groups that I'm sure are not doing very well. So I think in the first instance, support from governments and an understanding that tourism it is more to their economies than I think a lot of countries are realizing. UNWTO always says that 1 in 10 jobs is in tourism, and in some countries, tourism is huge portions of GDP. So I think getting governments to not underestimate how important it is to support the the hospitality industry is very important. And then going forward, hospitality is an exciting industry. I spent from my mid teenage years well into my late 30s working in hotels and hospitality, and thoroughly enjoying that, and making sure that people understand that it is a career. It's not a lifestyle. It's not the waiting job you might have done when you were at university is to earn some money, but there is a very respected career that can be had in the hospitality side. And I think it comes down to all of us to make sure that that is properly represented to young people. Tour guides, hotel managers, catering managers, whatever it happens to be, they're all good jobs. They are all important jobs. And what they do is they all contribute into the authenticity of the products that we're selling. And that sort of links me back a little bit to what both Joey and David were saying earlier on about experiential travel. Young travelers in particular want to have the authentic travel experience, and they will look for the travel experience that's off the beaten path. They will look for that quieter street where something is a little bit more normal and natural than the slightly more manufactured tourism of the heavy streets. But going back to what you were saying, yes, I think there's a lot that tourism and hospitality can do in terms of attracting people into the industry. They need to push internships, apprenticeships, training programs. Pay is always an issue, particularly between male and female staff. Those need to be leveled out. Hospitality pay needs to be brought up a little bit to make it a much more attractive industry. Inevitably, that then leads to the actual selling price of rooms, which all needs to be looked at. But if everybody's properly investing in this, then I think it's going to be a very strong proposition for young people. It's a great way to see the world whilst working in a very interesting career.
Great, thank you. Those are very good points, and hopefully young people will continue to see the value of this and use that kind of career to see the world and travel themselves. So as we're getting a little bit short on time, I wanted to wrap up by asking everyone just in 1 or 2 sentences your thoughts about the future of youth travel and what kinds of effects we might see in the short to long term from COVID-19 in youth travel in general, and especially youth travel to Beijing. And I'd like to start with you, Jürgen, if you're happy to answer first.
Then I think I already mentioned before, I think that there will be at least short-term effects. People will be traveling less for many reasons. One reason is obviously that flight tickets from Europe to China to Beijing are extremely expensive at the moment. But in the midterm or long term, the travel will resume. I think we are all convinced that tourism, that traveling is a very important part of our life, and that it's also a very important part of younger people's life. What we hope for is that flights will resume to Beijing, and we hope that the flight ticket rates will go down, which are now at far above 1,000 euro per person, which is definitely too high. We hope that there might be less restrictions for the visa, which is a bit moment from Germany, but I'm sure if that will happen, but it would be great. And then I think that midterm, the effects will be negligible.
Very good. I hope so. David, Joe, do you agree with that?
Well, I completely agree with that. Well, it's the visa issue is really the biggest thing that for years and years, we have done a lot of like effort just to write to the government and even speak to the higher level government, just to allow like more flexibility for visa issuing, and I think it will change, but it takes time. This is the first thing I would like to share. And secondly, for coming back of the global travelers to China, I will say it's optimistically, pessimistically, it's really hard to say. But from my perspective, I know China has done a great job that we very efficiently just control the whole pandemic issue. And I would like to share with you guys that with China, from July 14th, we have already started the domestic travel. And we just, the statistics, we can tell that we have more and more people going here and there. And we will expect our National Day holiday. And I think, we are on the way back. So I'm very confident in the future. I will say, like the young people, I completely agree with what you guys have mentioned, that they will be the first group of people trying to come and explore the different destination. It is just because of this pandemic thing, we can't open the door to you, but it doesn't mean that we don't want. And when the whole pandemic is over, I keep my promise that if any one of you come to Beijing, get me, I'd show you around to the Great Wall, to the Forbidden City. I keep my promise.
Thank you. Thanks. Joey, how do you see the future of youth tourism, and especially to Beijing, in kind of the short to medium to long term?
Well, I agree. The number one question we get from internet users at the Beijinger is, when can I come to China? And that's not just people coming back to China, that's people who are wanting to come for the first time. Like others have said, it does come down to that visa issue, but I think once that's sorted out, then people will be coming, will be viewing China as maybe one of the safer places to travel, given how the epidemic has been handled.
Great. And David Chapman, what are your thoughts, especially as someone who is really involved in youth and student tourism around the world, about the future prospects?
Well, I think, as I opened with, young people will start to travel just as soon as they can. But what I would say is don't discount the value of youth and student travelers. They might not be five-star hotel spend. But our research has consistently shown that a young traveller will spend more on their trip than a traditional tourist does. And that is because they stay longer in a destination. They are cash poor, but they're time rich. They will look for cheaper accommodation providers, but that is so that they can then spend more money on their experiences. They will seek out the authentic experiences. They'll seek out the privately owned experiences and restaurants and coffee shops. They will stay away from a lot of the bigger brand things. And on that basis, yes, they might spend less per day, but in many ways their value is greater than the traditional tourist because they actually leave more money with local people in destinations rather than with corporates in destinations. So don't just cut them out for that. And otherwise, I think, as much as we've said, we all hope and pray that this pandemic will pass young people will start to travel again. And don't forget, it's not just tourism. There's a lot of people are traveling for language learning, experiences, work, au pairing, internships, and so on. So there are lots of segments. And prior to the pandemic, our estimations, done in conjunction with the UNWTO, was that the youth and student travel sector is worth around 300 billion US dollars in tourism receipts. So it's not a small sector.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your very valuable insights and opinions and experiences. It's really been a pleasure to speak to all of you. And I hope that we will see that recovery of youth tourism and tourism in general in the coming months.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.